The air was crisp that evening, with just enough bite to make me pull my cardigan a little tighter around my shoulders. I remember thinking how perfect the balcony had seemed when I first stepped out. High enough to see the city lights spreading out like a constellation, but not so high that the sounds of life below completely disappeared. It was one of those in-between spaces, suspended between earth and sky, between the privacy of indoors and the openness of the world. The balcony belonged to his apartment, a place I'd visited many times before, but somehow always felt like I was seeing it for the first time. The wrought iron railing was cool to the touch, adorned with small potted herbs that he insisted on growing despite his notorious inability to keep plants alive. "They're survivors," he'd say with that half-smile that always made something in my chest flutter. "They put up with me." The sunset was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in watercolor strokes of amber and rose. I'd arrived just before dusk, carrying a bottle of wine and the weight of a day that had dragged on too long. He'd opened the door with that easy familiarity that comes from knowing someone for years. Not a hug, not quite a smile, just a slight tilt of his head that said, "Finally," without needing the word. We'd known each other for almost 5 years now, having met in the chaotic aftermath of a mutual friend's disastrous housewarming party. The kind where someone inevitably breaks something irreplaceable and everyone pretends not to notice. We'd both escaped to the fire escape, seeking refuge from the noise, and ended up talking until the party had dwindled to just a few stragglers inside. Since then, we'd developed this rhythm, this dance of closeness and distance that neither of us ever quite put into words. Friends, certainly. More than that. The question hung in the air between us during every meeting, every phone call, every text message that came just as I was thinking about him. I'd dated other people in those 5 years. So had he. But somehow, we always circled back to each other, like planets caught in each other's gravity. That evening on the balcony, I was single again after another relationship had fizzled out with more of a sigh than a bang. He hadn't asked about it directly, but I could feel his curiosity in the way he'd glanced at me when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd poured the wine I brought into 2 mismatched glasses, one a proper wine glass, the other a mason jar that he insisted enhanced the flavor profile, with a straight face that made me laugh despite myself. "How's the new job?" he asked, leaning against the railing, his profile outlined in gold by the setting sun. I'd recently started at a new firm, a step up that came with longer hours and more responsibility. I told him about my boss, about the projects that kept me up at night, about the coworker who insisted on microwaving fish in the break room. He listened the way he always did, completely, without interruption, nodding occasionally or raising an eyebrow at just the right moments. Let me explain why his way of listening mattered so much. In a world where everyone seems to be waiting for their turn to speak, being truly heard is rare. He didn't listen to respond. He listened to understand. It made me feel seen in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. Because when someone really sees you, all of you, not just the carefully curated version most people get, there's nowhere to hide. As I talked, the sky deepened from orange to purple, the first stars beginning to appear. The city below us transformed too, windows lighting up one by one, cars becoming nothing more than moving headlights. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once in that strange way it does when you're completely present in a moment. Then the wind changed. It had been gentle before, just enough to ruffle the pages of the book he'd left on the small table between our chairs. But suddenly it turned sharp, racing around the corner of the building with unexpected force. It whipped my hair across my face and sent a deep chill through my thin cardigan. I remember gasping slightly, more from surprise than discomfort, though the temperature drop was immediate and unmistakable. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. Without making a big production of it, he reached for the throw blanket he kept on a hook by the balcony door, a soft, worn thing in faded blues and greens that I'd teased him about keeping outdoors. "It's not outdoor furniture," I'd said once, to which he'd replied, "Neither am I, but here I sit." I smiled at the memory as he handed me the blanket, our fingers brushing in that brief, electric way that always seemed to happen no matter how careful we were. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, breathing in its familiar scent, a mixture of his laundry detergent and the subtle cologne he wore. The wind continued to gust, sending the small solar-powered lanterns on the railing swinging on their hooks, creating dancing patterns of light across the balcony floor. One particularly strong gust made me shiver visibly, despite my best efforts to hide it. That's when he said it. "Sit closer," he said, his voice quiet but clear even over the wind. Two simple words, yet they seemed to hang in the air between us, weighted with possibilities. I looked at him, trying to read his expression in the fading light. His face gave away nothing and everything all at once, that careful neutrality he maintained, but with something warm in his eyes that made my heart beat a little faster. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to move closer, but because I knew that sometimes the smallest distances crossed can change everything. There's safety in maintaining certain boundaries, in keeping some space between desire and action. But the wind gusted again, colder this time, and I found myself gathering the blanket and moving to the chair next to his, a decision made by my body before my mind had fully caught up. "Better?" he asked as I settled beside him, close enough now that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell the faint traces of coffee on his breath from the cup he'd had before I arrived. "Better," I agreed, and it was. Not just because of the physical warmth, though that was welcome against the increasingly chilly evening. There was something else too, a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. The city stretched out before us, a tapestry of lights and shadows, but suddenly it felt like background, like scenery in a play where we were the main characters. Our chairs were close, but not touching, that small gap between them suddenly the most interesting space in the world. I was acutely aware of every movement he made, the way he leaned forward to rest his elbows on his knees, the slight tilt of his head as he looked out at the view, the rhythm of his breathing that I could almost feel more than hear. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," he said suddenly, turning to look at me with that intense focus that always made me feel like I was the only person in his world. It was a game we played sometimes, trading secrets like currency, each confession buying us a step closer to whatever it was we were circling around. I thought for a moment, sifting through the various truths I kept hidden. "I'm scared," I finally said, the words feeling strange on my tongue, too honest, too raw. "Of what?" His voice was gentle, no judgment, just curiosity. "Of this." I gestured vaguely between us. "Of whatever this is that we never talk about. Of ruining it by talking about it. Of not talking about it, and waking up 10 years from now wondering what might have been." There. It was out there now, this thing we'd been dancing around for years. I couldn't take it back, couldn't repackage it in safer terms. The wind seemed to hold its breath along with me as I waited for his response. He was quiet for so long that I began to regret my honesty, began constructing ways to backtrack, to laugh it off, to pretend I'd meant something else entirely. But then he reached across the space between our chairs and took my hand in his palm warm against my cold fingers. "I'm scared too," he admitted, his voice low, almost lost in another gust of wind. "Terrified, actually, because you, matter too much to get wrong." The honesty in his voice made something in my chest ache. We'd both been hurt before, both carried scars from relationships that had ended badly. Trust didn't come easily to either of us. Yet here we were, perched on the edge of something that felt both dangerous and inevitable. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and made the corners crinkle in the way I'd always found endlessly charming. "We could start by being honest about the fact that neither of us is actually cold enough to need to sit this close." I laughed, the tension breaking like a wave against rocks, leaving behind something cleaner, clearer. "Speak for yourself," I protested, though the blanket had slipped from my shoulders without me noticing, forgotten in the heat of our conversation. "Okay, I'll go first," he said, shifting in his chair to face me more directly. "I've wanted to kiss you since that night on the fire escape. 5 years, and not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about it at least once." The confession hung in the air between us, bold and undeniable. My breath caught in my throat as I processed his words, the implications of them, the history they rewrote. 5 years of friendship, of late-night conversations and inside jokes, of being each other's emergency contact and go-to +1. 5 years of carefully maintained boundaries that, it seemed, we'd both been longing to cross. "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious. He wasn't usually one to hold back, to second-guess himself. "Because you were dating someone else when we met." And then when you weren't, I was. And then there was that whole year where you were focused on your career move and told everyone you weren't looking for a relationship. And then, he trailed off, shrugging. And then it had been so long that I was afraid of losing what we had. You're my best friend. The thought of messing that up was worse than the thought of never being more. I understood that fear all too well. It had kept me silent too, had made me date other people who never quite measured up, who never knew me the way he did. The wind picked up again, sending a scatter of leaves across the balcony floor, reminding me of how quickly things can change, how moments of opportunity can be lost if not seized. Your turn, he said softly, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand in a way that made it hard to concentrate. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. I've wanted you to kiss me for exactly that long. Maybe longer. I think I started falling for you somewhere between you telling me about your childhood dog and you helping me move into my new apartment in the rain because the movers canceled. His smile widened, and something in his posture changed, a tension releasing that I hadn't even realized was there. We've wasted a lot of time, haven't we? He said, but there was no regret in his voice, just a kind of wondering amusement. I don't know, I replied thoughtfully. Maybe we needed that time. To become who we are now. To be ready. He nodded, considering this. And are you? Ready? Instead of answering with words, I closed the small distance between us, bringing my free hand up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of evening stubble against my palm. His eyes darkened, his breath catching visibly. Time seemed to slow, the moment expanding to hold all the possibilities of what might come next. When our lips finally met, it wasn't the explosive passion of movies or the awkward fumbling of first kisses. It was something else entirely, familiar and new all at once, like coming home to a place you've never been before but somehow recognize. His hand came up to cup the back of my neck, drawing me closer, deepening the kiss in a way that made everything else fade away. The wind, the city, the years of waiting. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he must hear it. The look on his face, a mixture of wonder and desire and something deeper, more profound, made me feel both powerful and vulnerable. Well, he said, his voice slightly hoarse, that was worth waiting 5 years for. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months, maybe years. Imagine how good the next one will be. I teased, and was rewarded with his laughter joining mine, the sound of it carrying out over the city like a promise. The wind had calmed somewhat, or perhaps I just didn't notice it anymore, wrapped as I was in the warmth of this new understanding between us. We stayed on that balcony for hours, talking and not talking, learning the new geography of our relationship. Sometimes words flowed easily, confessions and hopes spilling out now that the dam had broken. Other times we sat in comfortable silence, his arm around me, my head on his shoulder, watching the city below go about its business, unaware of the small revolution happening above. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped further, but neither of us suggested going inside. There was something magical about that balcony, that liminal space that had witnessed our transformation from friends to something more. Eventually, we did move inside, but that evening on the balcony became a touchstone for us, a beginning we would reference in the years to come. Looking back now, I can see how that moment, sit closer, he said, and I did, changed everything. Not just our relationship, but my understanding of courage, of timing, of the risks worth taking. The balcony still exists, though we've moved to a larger apartment since then. Sometimes on windy evenings, we'll go out there with glasses of wine and reminisce about that night, about how close we came to never knowing what we could be to each other. I've learned that life is full of these pivotal moments, these seemingly small decisions that alter the course of our lives. Most of the time, we don't recognize them until we look back. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, we feel the weight of the moment as it's happening. We see the paths diverging before us and consciously choose which way to go. That night on the balcony, when the wind turned sharp and he invited me closer, I felt it, that sense of standing on the edge of something important. I'm grateful every day that I found the courage to move, to cross that small distance between our chairs that had symbolized the careful boundary we'd maintained for so long. Sometimes the biggest journeys begin with the smallest steps. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to sit a little closer, to let yourself be vulnerable, to admit what you really want. The wind that night was just wind, air molecules in motion, nothing more. But it became the catalyst for everything that followed. The push we both needed to finally be honest about what we'd been feeling all along. So if there's a moral to this story, perhaps it's this: don't wait for the perfect moment. It may never come. Instead, pay attention to the moments you're given, the invitations to sit closer, to be braver, to say what needs saying. Because sometimes, on an ordinary balcony on an ordinary evening, the extraordinary is waiting to happen. All you have to do is move your chair a little closer and see what happens next. Total _chair_count, 13,652.